Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Let me start off by saying, I was corrected this week about a quote I made in the Lane report about being somewhat like a Star Trek type of situation, boldly going where nobody's gone before. And I said, no, man. And so he said, well, you need to read the new ones and say no one. This has been a little bit of a new journey for me, being involved as a Senate president and getting the ability to designate something that I wanted and I felt appropriate to be a bill of significance and importance. And having heard comments over the year prior to coming into the session, heard the discussions that were talked about military voting, and in a way to somewhat signify a change in the way that we would proceed, talk to Secretary of State, who is with me, Secretary Grimes, about working on this issue. It was conveyed to me that several people were having problems. Secretary Grimes went to the Middle East, visited with numerous people, talked about the system. I think it was talked about how the snail mail and things of that nature. And so we proceeded to go down this road and take a journey about dealing with the ability of the military to accurately and cast their votes, and in a timely manner cast their votes. So from there I asked Secretary Grimes to join me to make this the issue that I would start out as the new Senate President designating. The problem that has occurred is that votes have had some problem getting cast because, one, there is not conformity with what the federal law requires. There was a case in which the Secretary was involved in that required some changes, and with that we have developed a bill that goes to an extent to try to change and guarantee the timely casting of votes and maintaining the integrity of the system. So I want to sit here and say to the Secretary, very pleased and happy to have worked with her and her staff, numerous people that have brought this to the attention of the General Assembly, and we go forward from there. The bill that you have before you is Senate Bill 1, addresses many of the concerns about how the ballots, registration and the ballots would be requested and then cast, and brings into conformity much of what is done here with a lot of the federal legislation on how they deal with military and overseas voters. If you wish to go through the bill, we can go through title and section, and it defines the covered voter and who is covered by this in section 2, that it will apply to primary, general, and special elections. It sets up the Secretary of State in the one section to develop the electronic transmission system for sending out registration and the ballots. It determines, where that person would be required to define their residence, being that last precinct that they lived in, using the federal postcard system and the electronic methods that have been endorsed by the federal system under federal elections is covered within this. Section 7 again goes into the postcard system about how you return the registration. The request an absentee ballot is in section 8. The period for requesting this and brings into conformity by amendment, and something that the Secretary of State's office requested, and that special elections have to be called not 35 days out, which many of us are aware of, but 45 days. How the covered voter, who is again not only just military, but some individuals such as a dependent, a spouse, civil service support personnel, diplomatic attachments, are to use this when they are to be counted. the declaration materials about making sure the integrity and who the individual is and how that information is covered so there is not a fraud and the penalties for trying to defraud. The anonymity that the clerks are to keep this information private when received. And there is a couple of things about the application and the registration, that the period of time for which it will be deemed a valid request, because as many people know, when you get deployed, are you going to be gone for a year or 2 years? But we will deal with part of that by amendment. The Uniform Act talks about a 2-year period. I'm going to request an amendment that I've talked with the chairman about, bringing it back to a 1-year period because of the uncertainty of the time frames. Then talks about the State Board of Elections and the Secretary of State promulgating regulations on dealing with this and maintaining the integrity. And then the one part that we have had some discussion about, and this is an area that has given me great concern, and I know this has been an area that the Secretary is very interested in, is all the electronic distribution of both the request to register and a request for an absentee ballot will be done either by the traditional way, which we all know that you go in and you make a request to the county clerk's office by mail or in person, then you receive it in person or by mail, and then you return it by mail. This will allow a fax or internet communication to the clerk's office, and then a return of that information to the clerks, from the clerk to the individual, back from the individual to the clerk, to get all the procedures necessary ready for a person to be able to register or to vote. And then the question becomes is how do they return that ballot? And that's where we've had a lot of discussion, and the Secretary, her staff, our staff has gone through this. This is where several articles were written, the county clerks, and I don't want to sit here and say there is a disagreement or anything, but there is a concern about how that would be returned, and could it be returned by the method in which it was sent. The bill as drafted says that they can return it. It was somewhat inartfully drafted, could return it by fax or email. But after hearing concerns, what we felt would be appropriate, or what I felt would be appropriate, I'll put that way, would be to look at it, since there are no elections at this time, and then look at the integrity of the system. So with this, it brings into conformity much of what the state does with how it is dealt with on a federal level for federal elections, and gives the Secretary of State and the county clerks many tools for expediting the process and making sure that the timeliness and the accuracy of the vote is done in a way that is appropriate for individuals who are stationed overseas and are covered voters because of their status and position. That is the direction and the intent of the bill, and hopefully this committee, and then after the Secretary discusses what her impetus was and her position on this end, I'd like to go ahead and talk about a couple amendments that we have given to the chair and have discussed with the Secretary. But that is the primary focus of this bill, and I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to come before the committee and present Senate Bill 1.
Senator Stivers.
Let me finish with this. Mr. Chairman, members of the body, and everybody that's listening, there is no doubt that each and every one of us want to make sure and have a passion to protect the rights of voters, and especially those people that are in the military. I, like Secretary Grimes, when I look out my house and look over on the hill where my father is buried, who served in World War II, my uncles who I've visited, and all my grandfather and great uncles, I see the military headstones that sit there. And I know that my cousins are currently over there in Middle East, not as military, but as civil service support people, having retired from the military and gone back as civil contractors. There is no question in my mind that Secretary Grimes and myself are both wanting to see a system that allows the individuals who are covered by this act, and it greatly expands this act that everybody agrees on. It goes to make the access to receive the materials much, much broader than what we currently had for all elections. And then the question becomes, and that which has been raised by the county clerks, and there have been other people that have been interviewed. And one thing that I want people to understand, it is not something that we are wanting to in any way impede anybody's rights to have their vote cast and counted. So with that, I have the Amendment 4, which in the broadening of this will, at this point in time, not allow for an electronic return. And this is the one, and I talked to Secretary Grimes. I don't say we talked, we communicated by text and
He's a good
email.
texter.
Text and email. This will, at this time, limit it to the traditional placing in the ballot, the envelope, and returning it by mail. But the overall system has been greatly expedited. And because of the concerns of integrity and the fact that there is no election in this year, and that goes consistent with another position I've had about redistricting, that we wait before we expand this to the electronic means and set up a group to look at all the different areas that are being done about securing the system and reporting back to the General Assembly by November 27th, I think, of this year as to what that findings would be. So with that, Mr. Chairman, document number 4106 basically keeps the system for return only, currently in place. And that's what the document number 4106 does. I just appreciate the opportunity and the discussion, and I think everybody's passion for this is indicative of the thought process and the desire that we make sure that these individuals can cast their vote and do it in a way that is protects the integrity of the system and the anonymity of the voter. And I think it is a wonderful topic and a wonderful way we have conducted business in discussing the issue and bringing in a very open forum and dialogue. And want to thank the Secretary of State for all the cooperation and comments and input she's had on this bill.